At the dawn of the 20th century, women walked through the grand boulevards of Paris and London not as free beings, but as carefully sculpted statues of society's expectations. Their bodies were encased in heavy fabrics, suffocated by rigid corsets, and bound by layers upon layers of lace and constraint. Every breath was measured. Every step rehearsed. Every gesture controlled. Fashion was not freedom. It was a cage, an invisible prison, woven out of velvet, bone, and steel. The corset, praised as elegance, was in truth an armor of oppression, tightening the waist until ribs ached, lungs fought for air, and the spirit itself seemed compressed into silence. Women of high society were dressed as though they were ornaments, paintings to be admired, not voices to be heard. Their clothing announced wealth, lineage, and duty, but never individuality. This was the world into which Gabrielle Chanel was born. A world where beauty meant submission, and elegance was paid for with suffering. Where the idea of comfort, of simplicity, of authenticity in dress, was unthinkable. But what happens when one woman dares to imagine the opposite? When, in the midst of silks and suffocation, someone whispers, "What if elegance could mean ease? What if beauty could mean breathing?" In a time when women were imprisoned by fashion, and by the rigid laws of class and gender, there arose a voice unlike any other. Not from a palace, not from a privileged salon, but from the humblest of origins. An orphan. The daughter of a poor seamstress. A girl who knew abandonment, who knew silence, who knew what it was to live unseen. And yet, it was she who would dare to dream the impossible. She would not simply design clothes. She would design freedom. And so it was that an orphan, the daughter of a seamstress, dared to dream the impossible, to dress the world in liberty. Her name was Gabrielle Chanel. But before the world would ever whisper the name Coco, she was only a child abandoned by fate. Her father, a street vendor, restless and unreliable, vanished one day, leaving behind 3 daughters to the cold arms of an orphanage. Gabrielle was 12. It was the kind of wound that does not bleed, yet never heals. A betrayal written into silence. The convent of Aubazine became her new home, a stone fortress of discipline, ritual, and austerity. There were no soft embraces, no lullabies to soothe the darkness of night. Instead, there was the sound of bells, the rigid rhythm of prayer, the cold air of corridors echoing with obedience. The sisters dressed her in black and white, the only colors she would see. They taught her the art of sewing, of embroidery, of discipline in every stitch. Needle and thread became both burden and salvation, an imposed destiny for a girl who had no choice, but also the very tool that would one day alter the world. For Gabrielle, every stitch was a reminder: life could unravel, life could break apart, but with patience, with precision, one could also sew it back together. The orphanage was not just a place of survival. It was an anvil, shaping her will. The silence of the cloister forced her to listen inwardly. The austerity of the nuns stripped her of illusions, leaving only the essentials. The black and white habits etched themselves into her memory, later to return, transformed, as her signature style. And yet, she was still only a child. A girl who looked out of convent windows, watching the free world pass by, longing for something beyond stone walls and rigid rules. She learned discipline, but also rebellion. Submission, but also defiance. Because within the ashes of her childhood burned a quiet fire, the refusal to remain unseen. What could have crushed her instead carved her. The abandonment that might have shattered her spirit became the very steel of her character. The convent, with all its severity, planted in her a paradoxical seed, both order and resistance, both silence and the hunger to break it. It is often from the deepest fractures of life that our most radical visions are born. Would Chanel have dreamed of liberating women from corsets had she not known what it meant to suffocate? Would she have sought elegance in simplicity if her own youth had not been spent in stark austerity? Perhaps it is only when we have been imprisoned that we begin to imagine freedom. And so we ask, is it not from our greatest prisons that our true creative power begins to rise? Gabrielle Chanel's childhood was not a fairy tale. It was ashes, discipline, abandonment. But within those ashes, something unbreakable was forged. A girl who was taught to obey, learned, instead, how to command. When Gabrielle left the convent, she carried with her little more than discipline, a sharp gaze, and a stubborn refusal to accept the life that had been assigned to her. She could have remained invisible, a seamstress in some small provincial town, stitching other people's dreams into fabric while her own remained unspoken. But Gabrielle Chanel had no intention of disappearing. It was in the smoky cafés of Moulins that she first began to rewrite herself. By day, she worked as a seamstress, mending garments for others. But at night, under dim lights and before restless soldiers, she became someone else entirely. She stood on makeshift stages and sang a playful tune about a little dog named Coco. Her voice was not extraordinary, yet her presence was undeniable. And soon, the nickname clung to her. Coco. In that simple transformation, Gabrielle began her first act of reinvention. No longer just the orphan, no longer the abandoned child of the convent, she was Coco, a persona larger than her wounds, larger than her obscurity. Names are powerful. They can chain us to our past, or free us to become something new. Gabrielle understood this. To rename herself was to declare independence from the story that fate had written for her. And yet, reinvention does not happen in isolation. Coco attracted attention, not only from the audiences who smiled at her boldness, but from men who were drawn to her sharp wit and defiant charm. Etienne Balsan, a wealthy ex-cavalry officer, became both benefactor and companion, introducing her to a world of leisure and aristocratic privilege. Soon after, Arthur, Boy, Capel, a man of vision and restless ambition, would see in her not a mistress, but a mind as daring as his own. These relationships opened doors, yes. They gave her access to circles she could never have entered on her own. But Coco was never content to be merely an ornament in the lives of powerful men. She observed. She studied. She absorbed the rhythms of wealth and style around her, and then bent them to her will. Where others might have become prisoners of luxury, Coco turned luxury into her laboratory. She was not defined by the men she encountered. She defined herself in contrast to them. Their world was her canvas, but the brush was hers alone. This was the birth of the myth, a woman who refused to be the product of her circumstances, and instead became the product of her imagination. She did not wait for permission to exist. She invented herself. And perhaps this is why her story endures. Because it whispers to each of us, you, too, can step outside the script that was written for you. You, too, can become something other than what the world expects. Coco Chanel was not yet the icon she would become. But the seed of legend had already been planted. In the smoke of cafés, in the echo of laughter, in the audacity of a name, she had begun to breathe life into a destiny entirely her own. The world of fashion, at the turn of the 20th century, was a theater of excess. Women moved like fragile statues, weighted by skirts that swept the floor, decorated with feathers that crowned their heads, and constrained by corsets that carved their bodies into unnatural forms. Beauty was spectacle, elegance was display. And then came Coco Chanel. Her revolution was not declared in manifestos. It was whispered in fabric, stitched in silhouettes, revealed in gestures so radical they seemed, at first, almost scandalous. Chanel looked at the cage of fashion and dared to break it apart. Her first act of defiance, the corset. She stripped it away. To her, no woman could ever be truly beautiful if she could not breathe, if she could not move with ease, if her body was not free. For Coco, elegance was not sacrifice. It was liberation. In its place, she offered something unthinkable, dresses cut with clean lines, designed not to disguise the body but to accompany it. The waist was loosened, the form was softened, the movement became natural. Her garments did not command the woman, they obeyed her. And then, the simplicity. While others competed with lace and embroidery, Chanel eliminated what was unnecessary. She borrowed fabrics from men's wardrobes, jersey, tweed, and transformed them into emblems of modern femininity. She reimagined the shirt, the trousers, even the jacket. Clothes that had once been symbols of masculine power were recut, refitted, reborn on women's bodies. It was more than fashion. It was philosophy. The little black dress became her manifesto. At a time when black was reserved for mourning, Chanel turned it into the very color of sophistication. A woman can be overdressed, but never over-elegant, she declared. With a single dress, simple, unadorned, eternal, she redefined the idea of beauty itself. And the hats, no towering plumes, no extravagant constructions. Just clean lines, modest shapes, crafted to frame a woman's face instead of hiding it. In her world, the woman herself was the adornment. Clothes were merely the language that revealed her. It was scandalous. The elite mocked her, called her designs plain, austere, unfeminine. But Chanel was unmoved. She was not creating for the elite. She was creating for the future. And soon, the future caught up with her. Women discovered that in Chanel's clothes they could walk freely, drive automobiles, work, dance, live without constraint. Her fashion was not decoration. It was emancipation. Every scene carried a message. Women did not exist to be admired like porcelain dolls, they existed to move, to breathe, to act. Luxury, she once said, must be comfortable. Otherwise, it is not luxury at all. The genius of her revolution was this: she took away, instead of adding. She subtracted weight, she erased excess, she destroyed the armor, and in doing so, she revealed something extraordinary. She revealed the woman herself. Her critics could not understand it, because they mistook fashion for fabric. Chanel understood that fashion was identity. To redesign clothes was to redesign the woman who wore them. To free the body was to free the spirit. And so, the world changed. The corset was no longer a throne of elegance. It became a relic, a symbol of an age already dying. Women embraced Chanel not simply because her clothes were beautiful, but because they made them feel alive. She was not merely sketching garments. She was sketching possibilities. She was not sewing dresses. She was sewing freedom. And in the silence between each stitch, a new truth emerged. She was not designing clothes. She was designing a new woman. Freedom is never given without a cost. And for Coco Chanel, the price was written in solitude, sacrifice, and scars that even success could not conceal. She had built her empire on defiance, on tearing apart conventions and rewriting the very language of elegance. But to walk so far ahead of one's time is to walk alone. Her loves were as intense as they were impossible. Etienne Balsan had introduced her to luxury, but it was Arthur, boy, Capel who ignited her soul. He believed in her vision, supported her daring ventures, and became the anchor of her restless heart. Yet destiny was cruel. In 1919, Capel died suddenly in a car accident. Coco was shattered. She confessed that everything she accomplished afterward was done in the memory of that love. The woman who had freed millions from corsets could not free herself from grief. Even as her fashion empire grew, so too did the voices of criticism. She was called arrogant, cold, unfeminine. Her simplicity was mocked as poverty dressed in disguise. But Chanel wore those judgments like armor. She would not bend to her critics. Still, their words left wounds, hidden, perhaps, beneath pearls and perfume, but wounds all the same. Then came the darkest chapter, the Second World War. Paris was occupied, and Chanel found herself at the center of controversy. She closed her fashion house, withdrew from public life, and became entangled in relationships and alliances that would haunt her legacy. Some accused her of collaboration, others of mere survival. The truth, like much of Chanel's life, remains a paradox, half shadow, half light. For a woman who had devoted her life to freedom, the war revealed the chains she could not break. The whispers of betrayal, the suspicion, the shame, it all weighed upon her, reminding the world that even icons are not immune to human frailty. This was the contradiction of Chanel: she gave women liberation, yet she often struggled to liberate herself. She preached simplicity, yet lived surrounded by complexities. She drew strength from solitude, yet was tormented by loneliness. She built an empire, yet longed for love that remained forever unfinished. It is tempting to see her as flawless, untouchable, a goddess of fashion who remade the modern woman. But Coco was no goddess. She was flesh and blood, haunted and fragile, carrying within her both brilliance and brokenness. And perhaps that is what makes her story truly timeless. Because it asks us a question as sharp as any of her silhouettes. Is it possible to change the world without carrying deep scars of our own? After the war, silence surrounded her name. The critics, the controversies, the whispers of betrayal, many believed that Coco Chanel was finished, a relic of a bygone era. Paris had moved on, and fashion seemed ready to forget the woman who once defied its every rule. But Coco Chanel was not a woman to be forgotten. In 1954, at the age of 71, she staged her return. The world had changed, and new designers dominated the stage. Dior's new look, with its cinched waists and voluminous skirts, once again imprisoned women in the very silhouette Chanel had destroyed decades before. It seemed as if the cage had been rebuilt. And so, Coco struck again. She reopened her house, unveiled her collection, and reintroduced her vision of simplicity and movement. At first, the Parisian press ridiculed her. They called her out of touch, outdated, a woman chasing ghosts. But across the ocean, in America, the response was different. There, women understood her message. They embraced her lines, her freedom, her timelessness. Slowly, the tide turned. The world realized, Chanel was not outdated. Chanel was eternal. Her return was not just about clothes. It was about defiance. It was about proving that reinvention has no age, that vision does not expire, that freedom is not a fashion but a way of life. She showed that true elegance lies not in following trends but in transcending them. And so, her name became more than a signature on a dress. It became a symbol. Chanel, a word that carried the weight of elegance, the scent of liberation, the taste of reinvention. From the little black dress to the No. 5 perfume, from the tweed suit to the quilted handbag, each creation was more than fabric or fragrance. Each was a declaration of identity. Her legacy was not only to free women's bodies but to awaken their sense of power, their right to comfort, their right to be seen as themselves. Before Chanel, women were prisoners of appearance. After Chanel, they learned to breathe. And perhaps this is the greatest inheritance one can give to the world, to teach it how to breathe again. Coco Chanel's story is not only about fashion. It is about courage. It is about taking the ashes of abandonment, the wounds of love, the scars of solitude, and transforming them into something that illuminates generations. She did not simply reinvent clothing. She reinvented herself, again and again, until reinvention itself became her legacy. And now, her story turns back to us. And you? What is the invisible corset you still wear? What is the weight you must release, the script you must rewrite, the prison you must break, in order to reinvent yourself? Because if Chanel taught the world anything, it is this: reinvention is always possible. Even when the world doubts you. Even when time has passed you by. Even when silence surrounds your name. It is never too late to breathe again.